Hello, and welcome to MDIC's annual public forum. This year, we've split our traditional one-day event into weekly sessions across the span of 4 months, bringing you updates and findings of current trends in regulatory science. This summer, you'll hear highlights from the latest developments in innovative regulatory science tools from industry experts across the nation. MDIC members and partners will share their vision and strategy for improving diagnostic testing and product development using novel regulatory science approaches, collecting real-world evidence for use in regulatory decision-making, including patients as strategic partners in medical device development and the implementation of value-based strategies to improve patient access to medical technologies. To kick off our event, MDIC's President and CEO Pamela Goldberg will share highlights from the past year and a look into what we planned for the coming year. Then, she will be joined by FDA Commissioner Dr. Hahn to discuss the agency's shared goals and vision with MDIC, as well as updates from COVID-19. Please welcome MDIC's President and CEO, Pamela Goldberg.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for MDIC's first virtual annual public forum. Although we could not have this event in person this year, we're excited to be able to come together virtually with our stakeholders across the country and around the world to share the latest trends in regulatory science. If this is your first time attending our annual public forum, welcome. For those of you who have attended APF before, welcome back. Many of you may already be familiar with MDIC and our mission to accelerate and improve patient access to innovative, high-quality, safe and effective medical technologies. For those of you who may be less familiar with us, MDIC was created to help prioritize the regulatory science needs of the medical device community and to help simplify the process of medical device design and pathway to market for those innovations. We've done this by convening people, funding, resources, and ideas across various work streams to develop new tools, models, and methods that may be utilized to better and more efficiently evaluate new devices. To learn more about our organization and our growing effort to support patients, I invite you to watch this short video.
MDIC is the first ever public-private partnership created to advance medical device regulatory science. Since 2013, we've been identifying high-impact areas to address the challenges associated with the development, assessment, and review of emerging medical technologies. We've done this by creating forums for collaboration, dialogue, and action, making strategic investments in regulatory science, and providing tools to drive cost-effective innovation. To add value to the intersecting needs of the medical device industry, MDIC supports a number of initiatives within the areas of clinical science, data science and technology, and health economics and patient value. Through the NEST Coordinating Center, we aim to accelerate the development of safe new health technologies, leveraging real-world evidence and innovative research. We offer a unique forum for medical device stakeholders to move beyond baseline regulatory compliance activities and collaboratively develop sustained predictive practices that advance medical device quality and safety to achieve better patient outcomes. MDIC aims to identify and pursue projects that will improve diagnostics testing and product development, using novel regulatory science approaches developed through collaboration between MDIC stakeholders. We seek to establish a more predictable pathway for using new, innovative methods to support the use of external data for regulatory decision-making. Our clinical science work includes accelerating first-in-world patient access to safe and effective new technologies through US-based early feasibility studies. We work to advance medical device cybersecurity by focusing on projects that identify cyber vulnerabilities and threats to medical devices and supply chains, and offer solutions to strategically strengthen security in these areas. We seek to integrate patient perspectives and preferences in the design, development, and review of medical technologies. Our Health Economics and Patient Value Initiative improves pathways for coverage, coding, and payment to speed patient access and amplify their voice in the selection of treatment options. Through all of our initiatives, we advance medical device regulatory science to benefit patients. And as we grow, we will continue to help patients receive innovative, safe, and effective therapies at a lower cost and in less time.
We recently released our 2019 annual report, which highlights many of our accomplishments and milestones, including the publication of several patient engagement resources, the completion of new harmonized education materials for the use of surrogate samples, the expansion of our case for quality and cybersecurity initiatives, and FDA's recognition of our National Evaluation System for Health Technology, NEST, as a collaborative community. I encourage you to read our 2019 annual report online and also join us for future annual public forum sessions where we will go into more depth on progress of these initiatives. Thank you again for joining us today, and please make sure to join the conversation on Twitter by following MDIC Annual Forum and using the hashtag MDICAPF2020. Without further ado, let us welcome FDA's Commissioner, Dr. Stephen Hahn. Commissioner Hahn, I really appreciate your taking some time to be with us. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium has had a great partnership with FDA over a number of years, and we really appreciate you taking some time today as our first virtual annual public forum. And so this is normally an in-person event and a full day event, but this year we're doing it virtually and doing it via webinar. So thank you for joining us, and especially at this very challenging time for our whole country, but certainly for you and your team at the FDA.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It is an absolute honor and pleasure to be here with you. We consider you to be an important and terrific partner with FDA, and I think COVID-19 and the pandemic has shown how important that partnership is.
Great, great. So I will be asking you a series of questions, and I look forward to our talking a little bit about the relationship between MDIC and FDA, and certainly want to give you an opportunity to talk about FDA's response to COVID-19. But I thought that maybe we could start out with a little piece of your story and your history. You jumped into your role and had to dive into COVID-19 right from the start. So the community hasn't had a lot of opportunity to know the man behind the job. And so I was hoping that maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey to get to becoming an oncologist and your work at MD Anderson on your pathway to become FDA Commissioner.
Absolutely, and thank you for that opportunity. As you all know, I was confirmed as the 24th Commissioner of Food and Drugs in December, and sworn in on December 17th. And really, it's just an honor of my lifetime and my career to be FDA Commissioner. It's a terrific organization, and throughout my career as a cancer doctor and cancer researcher, I've come to depend upon FDA and knew the great work that FDA did. As you probably know, I'm a board-certified medical and radiation oncologist, so the device world is pretty known to me, particularly on the radiation oncology side. And so I have a great interest, but also a really great admiration for the work that MDIC and does with FDA. So I became a doctor in 1984 and graduated from medical school in Philadelphia. That's where I'm from originally. I had been in college in Texas, so I have some Texas roots from way back. And then trained in internal medicine, medical oncology, spent a lot of time in the laboratory, learning the principles of cancer research and a lot about the clinical development process. and then was at University of Pennsylvania for 18 years. I then went to MD Anderson, where I became the chief medical executive, and really shifted my career from, although still involved in patient care, really to a management and administrative point of view. So learning finances, learning operations, learning about all the issues that get into a very complex organization, running a physician practice, how the finances fit with that, how the procurement of medical devices fit with that, the importance of all of those things to operations. And so given my experience as a cancer researcher and as a clinical trialist, to me, it was a natural fit to consider this job, and certainly it was an honor to be nominated by the president and then to be confirmed by the Senate. It's how I got here. I miss my friends at colleagues at Penn and MD Anderson, and one thing that really I do miss is the direct patient care, but I feel that being at FDA has the opportunity to provide great impact for patients around the globe.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's been clearly a very impressive journey of yours. And one of the things that is a real standout is that you've authored over 220 peer-reviewed research articles and have experience in medical product development and clinical trials that spans drugs, biologics, devices, and diagnostics. And so how has all of that research and all of that work empowered you to get up to speed with FDA's work and effectively lead the agency?
So my strategy when I came to the agency was to really immerse myself in all of the medical products and food sphere, because we often forget that the F in FDA is food, and the safety and security of the American food supply is of paramount importance. It's basically a national security issue, as we've seen in the effects of the pandemic. But the experience I had in medical product development, and it's really interesting because not ever having known that I would assume this position, but having been involved in devices and drugs and devices really taught me, and the learning curve is steep for anyone, really taught me about the complexities of the medical product development approach and pipeline. And it is different for medical devices than it is for drugs, but there are some parallels, obviously, that are principles that we use at the FDA. So that was a good background, I think, but there are so many complex issues that face the agency. We have a primary responsibility for ensuring the public health through our regulatory authority, and it spans, as you know, devices, laboratory tests, radiologic devices, drugs, biologics, vaccines, everything that we're hearing about now. And so really immersing myself and learning about the organization. And for the first 6 weeks, spent a lot of time doing that, meeting with the leadership, building trust, and getting to understand the culture. But of course, COVID-19 came. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for all of us, hopefully, and one must respond. And so I had to lead our efforts to the COVID-19 at the same time that I was learning about the agency. The fortunate thing about that is that our agency has so many experienced, great professionals who are committed to the public health that it made that much easier than it might otherwise have been. I think the other point about this is that I reached outside former FDA officials, colleagues around the country, health officials, to really ask questions about the agency, their perspective. And the advice was remarkably uniform. And the first piece of advice by folks both inside the agency previously as well as outside who've never been in the agency was to trust agency officials, the leadership and the staff. And boy, did that turn out to be a really great advice, because the expertise and the commitment, as I said, to our mission is just tremendous. And my outside colleagues said to me, this is a public health emergency like we've never seen. It's really important that you approach all of the decisions that you have to make with a sense of urgency and speed, and also transparency. And so we really sent the message to the agency about we need to balance speed, obviously, with safety and effectiveness, but we need to be transparent about our processes. And of course, in a fast-moving pandemic, that's been a challenge, but we continued our attempts to educate and to be very transparent about the decisions that we make. And then one final thing, it's really been important to me throughout my career, and certainly important to FDA, that we use data and science to support all our decisions. And just like in a medical emergency, a doctor may not have all of the data that's necessary to make the final decision, but you take the data you have, you take the information you have, you make decisions, and then you update it as you go, based upon new information. And I think that's what we've seen here during this pandemic. It's what the agency has always strived to do. We've just done it in an accelerated timetable. And I'm very proud that our North Star remains science and data to guide our decisions.
Which is a great segue to the fact that even before we recognize the challenges of the pandemic, in your first all hands meeting with the FDA staff, you stressed the importance of incorporating data and real world evidence in decision making. So, and clearly real world evidence has been critical in the way you've addressed the pandemic, but what do you see as the value of real world data and real world evidence over time?
So you're absolutely right. It's been critical during the pandemic because we've had to make some pretty quick decisions with the data available. And you can think of testing as a great example here. As we've gathered real world operating information, how are these tests working in the real world? I mean, just think about it. In the beginning of March, something like 50, 60,000 tests were done in the country. Now we have over 19 million tests being performed with multiple different platforms. That's an acceleration of test development like this country, frankly, no country has ever seen. So naturally, you're going to work with the data you have to do the initial authorization. But then what we want to see is how do these tests operate? And then we're going to update our authorizations and provide in a transparent way as much information as we can to providers and users and the American public. So it's an example of how using real world evidence, how we've had to accelerate that. Now, as we look forward, we need to think about how real world evidence fits into the initial authorization or approval of a product. But then also, and some of this work's already been ongoing, particularly in the device area. I think Jeff Shern and the Centers for Device and Radiologic Health have really done a great job of pioneering this. But on the back end, the post-marketing end of this, after an approval, what data can we collect to look at really how these devices, how the tests operate, how they perform, and then incorporate that back in. The American people, I believe, have learned during this pandemic, but do want us to continue to learn using real world evidence and to update what we're doing. I think everyone recognizes that as in medicine and science, you'll always update what you do based upon emerging data. And it would be a mistake for us not to have those data available. So as you know, we're working with the Reagan-Udall Foundation, excuse me, and we have real world evidence accelerators in the device sphere, test sphere, as well as in the drug and biologic development. We will really work on that a lot in the upcoming years to incorporate that further. The question though is, how do we do that in a robust way so that we have the right information for the decisions? Because as we've seen in this very fast-paced outbreak and pandemic, that the data sometimes has to catch up with where the actual clinical manifestations of the disease are. We don't always be in this situation, but we are going to have to figure out how we collect those data and how do we verify and validate it so that we can trust the conclusions that we're drawing from those data.
Yeah, and it fits, and we really appreciate FDA inviting us to the table as part of this Reagan-Udall analysis of response to COVID-19. And certainly we've been involved with real world evidence on the diagnostic side, and our National Evaluation System for Health Technology has helped us further partner and test the value of real world evidence in collaboration with network collaborators and with industry, and look forward to continuing that work as we both together explore how we get from here to there and use data more and more effectively over time.
Well,
But
if I may jump in there, because I think it's a superb point you're making. First of all, thank you for participating. I know you just thanked us, but thank you for participating in your engagement on this. The partnership with MDIC has been tremendous, and we both learned a lot. And I think another big lesson, huge lesson out of the pandemic is that we're going to rely. There's an interdependency here that we need to be partners. Now we have to maintain our regulatory independence, obviously, but we need to learn from each other. We need to hear from you. What are the data that you think are important for your devices? And also, what data do we need to make our decisions? And then how do we align that? And I think one thing will come out of our experience with the pandemic is that we will have an even closer collaboration with the incredible private sector that we have in this country.
that's terrific. And so, the rest of our nation's healthcare needs haven't just disappeared because of COVID-19. And how do you manage those competing priorities while the agency needs to focus so much of its efforts on COVID-19?
So you are absolutely right. The world, from a medical product point of view, didn't stand still, and we're fortunate that it didn't. We organized ourselves early on around our response to the pandemic. So in late January, early February, we set up an incident command structure as well as an agency executive group to manage our response and to provide horizontal alignment. At the same time, center by center, we asked the centers to create what's called a prioritization framework. How were they going to prioritize their work? Now, obviously, what rose to the top was the urgency around the pandemic, but we also knew that other work would need to be done, and so we allocated resources based upon that prioritization framework. Of course, first to put resources, and this is mostly human resources, but also information technology resources and administrative resources around the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we did further prioritization around what were the most important issues within that. But we also wanted to make sure that the other work that we needed to do, the approval process for things that were ongoing, the assessment of post-marketing data, that we were continuing to do that work. And I'm very proud of how the agency has responded. It really has been a 24/7 sort of response to this. And one of the things that we're doing right now is we're actively involved in, the military calls it a hot wash or an after action review. We're looking back at the same time that we're still responding to the pandemic. What have we done? What are the things that we might have done better? We want stakeholder engagement on this. What are the things that really worked well? Let's keep those in place as we move forward beyond COVID-19. And what are the things that we can change from a regulatory process and procedure point of view to continue to accelerate medical product development outside of COVID-19, so that the lessons learned about what worked and what could be improved can be applied for the future. And one of the things I'd like to tell your group and all of your members is that we're committed to the process improvement and continuous change and continuous improvement. And we will implement those things that we did during the outbreak that we think best benefit the American people and the acceleration of innovation, all the while realizing that we have a primary responsibility to ensure that devices, drugs, biologics are safe and effective.
Patient safety obviously is first and foremost for all of us. And yet at the same time, I know that FDA is trying to streamline the approval of diagnostics, devices, and treatment that can help fight COVID-19. And so how is that different from the traditional regulatory approval processes?
So in a public health emergency, we have the authority by statute to issue emergency use authorizations. And that's an authorization, not an approval, as you would typically hear under normal circumstances. And we've used, particularly in the device sphere, for personal protective equipment, ventilators, diagnostic tests, serologic tests, we've used this emergency use authorization. You hear it referred to as the EUA. What that allows us to do is just what I described earlier and what a doctor would do in an emergent situation. Use the data that are in front of you. Assess the risks and benefits of what that data shows, and what you think the outcome will be if you authorize, say, a device or a test. So if the benefits in a public health emergency outweigh any risks that one might have identified, then we go forward with the authorization process. Understanding, of course, that we're going to ask for additional data. We're going to look ourselves actively for additional data, and we're going to update the emergency use authorization with those data as they become available. In a public health emergency, what we didn't want was to stand still when we knew there were urgent needs around the country. I mean, just think about personal protective equipment, for example. We all acknowledge that we did not have the domestic manufacturing capacity for the personal protective equipment that we needed for the unprecedented demand of PPE during the COVID-19 peak. And we had to rely upon much of the product that was imported into the country. Some of that product hadn't previously been approved by us, and we had to go through the EUA process. And we had to show flexibility because time was our enemy in this. We needed to get product to the great providers in this country. So it's an example of how we use that authority. We used the data we had, and then when we needed more, when we collected more data, we updated our emergency use authorization. So that differs very much from the authorization process, where you have a significant amount of time to collect data on the front end before you do the approval process. But what I think we can do moving forward across the medical products is to really figure out what data sets are actually needed to make the initial approval, and then what can we collect to add to that approval and to provide as much transparency and information to end users as much as possible. Now, again, we want to engage with you. We want to engage with end users. We want to understand what people think they need from an information point of view, but also we want to be able to provide to you what we think are the data sets that are necessary for us to make that first assessment of patient safety. And the good news here is exactly like you said, MDIC and FDA are both committed to patient safety. So when we have that kind of alignment up front, it really can ensure that we don't cut corners around safety, but that we try to do as much as possible to enhance innovation and speed products to the American people.
That's terrific. Thank you. And so MDIC, from its inception, has been identifying high impact areas to address the challenges associated with the development, assessment, and review of emerging medical technologies. And so what do you see as key areas in MDIC's future that can further impact the medical device industry in partnership with FDA?
Well, I think the first thing is really focus on innovation. Your group, your industry has really done a terrific job in innovating for the country and for the world. So a continued focus on innovation to get the absolute best medical products into the hands of providers and consumers, I think that's job number one. And what we want to hear from you are what are the barriers that you perceive to innovation? Because sometimes with the best intentions, there are things that government does, there are things that industry does that unintentionally put barriers in the way of innovation. And one thing that I think has characterized this field is that the incredible innovation has benefited the American public and consumer and also provider and patient. Two other things that I think really are important, and one comes out of COVID, the other maybe not so much. And the one coming out of COVID is how are we going to look at the diagnostic test situation? What's the appropriate balance between regulation and innovation? So I think that's going to be a big topic for us all to discuss moving forward. And then I think the other part of this is how are we going to use digital technologies? How are we going to use the incredible sort of approaches to the digital world that we've seen in the private sector to make regulation better, more efficient, easier on innovators, but at the same time allows us to do our job of ensuring safety. So I look forward in all of those areas working very closely with MDIC on this.
That's great. And certainly we have seen a growing need for a focus on diagnostics specifically. And so that's consistent with what we're seeing from our member organizations and the work that we're doing, but also looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning and how those new technologies will impact not only how devices get developed, but how that will impact the regulatory process. And so,
and as you probably know, we have a number of different pilot projects, and we're now moving beyond the pilot projects with using artificial intelligence to help us, for example, in the food safety side of the house. There are data there to be mined. Modernizing our approach to data, using data sets in a way that allows us to have machine learning and AI point us in the right direction in food safety, but also on device safety and device effectiveness. And what's the next generation look like based upon what those approaches help us determine. And so we look forward very much to your partnership and as we modernize our approach to data.
Well, that's terrific. And we're all learning as we're going, and the landscape keeps shifting. So it's a learning process for all of us at once. And just as you pointed out that the F in FDA is for food, and we sometimes add an additional D, so it's drugs and devices. That are important to the work that FDA does. And we really appreciate the opportunity to work with you and your colleagues. Is there something that you wished I had asked you about that I haven't yet this morning?
Well, maybe not wish that you asked me about, but just a message for MDIC and the American public, and that is, we've seen unprecedented challenges for this country on a variety of different topics over the last several months. The country's FDA is completely committed to the public health of our nation. We want to be very much an enabler to the development of products that help the American people on every level, and to ensure that the food is and our food supply is safe and secure. We will learn from everything we've done. We are a learning organization, and we will constantly provide an update to the approaches that we're using, and we promise transparency to the American public about our regulatory approaches, but also our amazing commitment to the American public health. And I, for one, want to thank MDIC for the partnership that we have. And just to say that as long as we continue these dialogues and we are open to feedback, this is sort of the American tradition. I think we're going to be in a really good place. And I'm confident that the country is going to come out of this and just be even stronger in the future.
Well, Commissioner Hahn, I really appreciate your taking the time with us. We look forward to that future that you're describing. This is definitely a very challenging time for our whole country, and really appreciate the hard work that FDA is doing to keep us safe, to make things better, to help us get past this pandemic. And so thank you for taking the time in the midst of all of that to be with us and to share with the MDIC community, and look forward to our further collaboration and work together.
Thank you. It's really my pleasure. Everybody stay safe.
And you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for attending MDIC's annual public forum. We hope you will join us for next week's session, where Nadim Yared, President and CEO of CVRx and MDIC Board Chair, will be joined by Dr. Jeff Shurin, Director of FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health, as well as other members of his team, to discuss CDRH's priorities, programs, and partnership with MDIC.